Well, good afternoon. My name is Chris, and I'm happy to talk to you about burping better. There are really kind of two concurrent themes in this talk. One is really about finding struts and kind of the best way to do that in an environment, whether it's in your own environment or in a client's environment in a pen test. But then there's also kind of a bit of a John Strand theme here of building things and giving them away. So if you pay attention, I'm sure you'll pick that up. So just a bit about myself, so you have some idea who I am. The last name is pronounced Elgee, like the letter L and the letter G. I am a nerd at counter-hack challenges, proud to be there with those guys. I do want to mention Sage Data Security too, my previous employer, because I did most of this work on their time, and I do appreciate that from them. I got some certs. I'm also in the Army National Guard. If you speak Army at all, there's some letters, and I feel really so important. All right. So this all kind of came from what I like to call false negative anxiety. Now, a penetration test is not about finding every single thing in a client's environment. If you're hiring a pen tester and they tell you that they're going to find every single thing, they're lying to you, run away. At the same time, if there's something really obvious that you miss, you're kind of letting your client down. So, for example, had I been the pen tester, and I don't know if they had a pen test, but had I been a pen tester a month before Equifax got hacked, I would feel really bad having not found the RCE in their website. And not to pick on Equifax, but it's a case that I think everybody's familiar with when it comes to Struts vulnerabilities. By the way, as this goes on, this is a moderately technical talk, and really more looking at the Strut side of things than the Burp extension building side of things. There was a talk last year in Stables by Sampson was the last name. He talked specifically about how to build extensions. So if you're looking for that piece of it, that could be the piece you're missing. I encourage you to go back and look at that. So things that I don't want to miss as a pen tester. I don't want to miss Cisco, right? If that's there and someone's still got that enabled, I'm going to really feel like a jerk having missed that. If somebody's got a password that's really terrible but not in my dictionary, I mean, that's kind of hard to deal with, but I might miss that. I don't have an easy way to find all those terrible passwords. A really dumb URL with things hidden in it, again, maybe it's in my fuzzing dictionary, maybe I found it with Dirbuster, and then I'm going to feel like a jerk if I didn't. If it's something obvious like this that I just wasn't able to find. Logic bugs, like shopping cart quantities. That's really what humans are for when it comes to web app pen testing, right? Tools like NetSparker can find a lot of the automated finds, but it's really the purpose of having humans is to think about things there and be creative and think that, oh, that TXT file that's being served up, that's actually a log file of admin logons. I saw that recently. Scanners won't typically pick up on that. The last two are also kind of in that same category. When you've got an XML external entity in a website where you're able to basically inject in a call out to another site to pull in additional entities, that's not hard to check for, but it's something that we don't always think to do in every case. Maybe if there's a piece of a web app that involves submitting XML, you might think of that, or maybe if it involves submitting JSON, you think, well, maybe I can switch it to XML and try it. I want to do that. I want to do that automatically every time. Same thing for struts. There are ways to find struts vulnerabilities. And oh, my aching struts. This is just a partial list. These, by the way, on the left-hand side, those are the CVE numbers along with the Apache internal S2, Struts2 numbers with them. Those are all RCE. And as you can tell by the years, they come out fast and furious, and they seem to keep coming. As far as finding them, there are plenty of methods of discovering them. I didn't invent any of these. Python scripts in the red box there, because we're going to come back to Python scripts, is a good way to exploit things. In fact, if you look, and I actually built this piece of it before I started working for CounterHack. If you look at the 2017 Holiday Hack Challenge, you actually needed to use a Struts vulnerability to get into a web server to pivot into the internal environment. And there was actually coincidentally, there was a Sans Pen Test blog post about doing that very thing right before the Holiday Hack came out. And by the way, if you do try this plugin, and we'll get there, and you want to scan dev.northpolechristmastown.com, it will pop with a vulnerability for Struts, the second newest one, 9805. Another way, sometimes you can find Struts with vuln scanners, but that's kind of hard because they can be URL specific. So unless you're feeding your Nessus Qualys Nexpose with a full list of URLs, you're probably going to miss that one page that has the vulnerability in it. NSE scripts, similar. There are some powerful NSE scripts, and I love Nmap scripts, but they've got to have that URL list because they're not typically going to do the kind of spidering you need to find these things. ActiveScan++. Has anybody used ActiveScan++? Awesome. So if you're using Burp Pro already, It's a free extension you can get. We're going to talk a lot about it here in a bit, and it looks for cool things, including the Equifax version of Struts, the 5638. So here is a Python script. This is something actually coded by Chris Davis. Chris Davis, thank you very much, Chris Davis. Coded this cool thing. It's up on GitHub. And then, in long and short, what it does in the top box, I set up my own script for the holiday hack last year where I could just get a shell on a box by feeding a command in. This is what I want the box to do. Please execute this command. And then the script very helpfully hands this big OGNL blob of Java code that you don't really need to understand other than that the Struts engine is interpreting this and then taking the command, which was very cleverly disguised with base64 and some T, so you can get special characters through. So long and short, Python script, awesome. I aim it at a specific website, give it a specific command, it executes a command for me. That's awesome. Now, if I have a whole list of URLs and I want to script something to use this script a bunch of times for each of those URLs, you could, in theory, use that to scan for this specific Struts vulnerability. But I'm lazy and I'm forgetful, and I want it to happen automatically for me every time. And here's shell. I got ifconfig. Yay! All right. So ActiveScan++, built by one of the smartest web app testers I've ever heard of, James Kettle. If you've ever heard of albino wax, if you want to feel really dumb, go look up a talk like Cracking the Lens. The man is absolutely brilliant when it comes to web app pen testing. And he wrote this cool extension and gave it away. Thank you, James Kettle. Where it'll look for a bunch of funky side things, including 5638. That is again, the Equifax Struts bug. It does require Burp Pro, I'm sorry. It's $350 a year. Also, Jython is a Java Python interpreter that lets you use Python code in Burp, and also Burp Collaborator. We'll come back to Burp Collaborator in just a second. So here's an example of what happens. So you're on a page, you've spidered all your URLs, you're then told it to active scan whatever pages you've found. So ActiveScan++ would already go ahead and give some funky command. So here in the red box, you see a content type, and then like weird code stuff. As web app pen testers, typically we think of injecting funky values in what kind of areas of a request? Form fields, absolutely. Where else? And yeah, absolutely. Cookie values. Maybe in the URL, maybe in the host header field, right? With some of these Java strutsy kind of things, it'll be in like content type, or it'll be in the name of the cookie, or maybe even in the name of a header. It'll show up in weird places where people haven't thought to sanitize input. So kind of cool. So what this one does is it throws in a please add a header called XXE, and here's some math. And then when it comes back from the server with a response with a new header called XXE and the math completed for you, you know that it's vulnerable to 5638. So cool. That's a cool, easy check. All right. Switching gears for just a second, Burp Collaborator. So normally when you're testing, the packets are going back and forth between you and the server, and that's awesome. Or your client's server. It says client. I probably should put client server. Anyway, now sometimes it's useful to have a third party in here, and that's where Burp Collaborator pops in. This is a service that's available to anybody using Burp Pro. You can also set up your own Collaborator server for no additional cost, so that when you send something to the client that's going to cause an external interaction, it'll go up to the collaborator, whether that's pulling an HTTP request, SMTP, SMTPS, or DNS. This will serve as a DNS server, as a web server, all those things, just to receive those interactions so that then you can pull the Burp Collaborator automatically in the background and find out what you've caused that web server to do. Useful for things like blind command injection. All right, so ActiveScan++, it does all these things. I wanted to do more, but I don't want to code in Java. I'm sorry. Are there Java coders in the room? God bless you. Thank you. I don't want to, but I can use Python, right? Because there's this Jython thing, and that's great. I'm much more comfortable with Python. Not like Joff Thayer comfortable, but a little bit comfortable. Also, all right, and this is a coworker saying, just build an extension. I'm like, dude, I don't know the first thing about building a Burp extension. This is in my first year as a professional pen tester. Like I have no idea, but there are already things out there that are similar, like ActiveScan++, where you can just pilfer code, because everybody pilfers code, right? We all Google and take other chunks of code. Some of us are honest about everybody. Okay. And then it comes, how do I make it go? Well, there are already these cool existing Python scripts. So at this point, you've got everything you need, right? You can use a language I'm comfortable with. There's also JRuby if you want to code in Ruby for Burp, I guess. There are similar extensions I can pilfer, and there are scripts I can use to rip off. So at that point, it's just a matter of coding it. So that's what I did. I stole Chris Davis's code. Thank you, Chris Davis. And just put these big OGNL blobs that, again, not essential that you understand every piece of it, but you're putting it in the extension, into the code that's already there. Thank you, James Kettle. All right, now this is about command injection, and in a lot of cases, blind command injection. You may get reflection, and that's great, but if you don't, you want something where you're going to be able to detect that, because if your client, if it's buried somehow, you want to make sure that you're detecting whether or not something's happening, right? So I want it to work in a blind context, which means dir, ls, who am I, echo, they're just out. I want it to be cross-platform, and yes, I know there's wget in PowerShell, and that's great, but you're probably not operating in a PowerShell context. I want it to be widely available. NSLOOKUP is great, but if you're in like a bare Docker instance that just has Apache in it, thank you, Daniel Pendolino, you may or may not have NSLOOKUP there, right? That's an additional package that's not necessarily there. I do like it though, because Windows is going to use it, and most Linux distros will use it. I also wanted to go over firewalls, so funky ports are kind of out. I also don't want it to run forever, because again, this is in a client server, and if I'm testing a bunch, I don't want to leave 1,000 running ping processes. So what I ended up with, and this is going to look a little strange to probably everybody, is this command. On Linux, what will this do? It'll ping once. Even though it's out of order, it will, in every environment I tested, it will ping once. But before it can ping, what does it need to do? It needs to look up the host, right? So even if NSLOOKUP isn't there, it's going to resolve that name. On Windows, do you know what this will do? It will not launch calc. I wish it did. It'll actually fail when it gets to the -C1, because in Windows it's what, N1? And but before it fails, it will resolve that name. So this is a cheap cross-platform way to get the name resolution. And maybe it will ping out. That's great. I don't care. What I'm looking for in Burp Collaborator is, did that name resolve? So that's what I'm using in this extension for to check for command execution. So then it comes a matter of, hey, I got it, it's up, it's working, and then, new pen tester anxiety, how am I going to go to James Kettle and be like, hey, I made your thing better, right? I'm just some new guy. And then I don't know who Zephyrfish is, but with an avatar like that, it can be a little intimidating, right? I've never seen such a sharply dressed stormtrooper. So you kind of have to get over it, right? And that's what I did. And this is paraphrased a little bit, but basically, I go to GitHub and make my changes, and hey, I'd like you to merge this into the main thing. And I made it, and then James Kettle replies. I'm like, wow, this is the real James Kettle. He's talking back to me, and he says, oh yeah, but you did something kind of funky here. Did you really mean to? Oh, right, yeah, no, that's not quite right. And just based on, we can nerd out later about what was kind of off about it, but I fixed it, went back to him, and he bumped the version and made a couple style changes, and now it's in the product. So if you've been using ActiveScan++ since like May or so, you've got these changes in there. Thank you. Thank you. My mom loves me too. So look at me now, number 2 contributor for this plugin. Thank you very much. All right. And then Homestar Runner wants to know, so what? All right, you made this thing. What has it actually gotten? Interesting thing, I actually found a 0-day in Jamf Pro. It's like an iOS device management thing for enterprises, where it wasn't the Struts piece of it, but it was, but with developing those Struts little checks, doing an XXE check was actually kind of trivial, because I had all the pieces I need, especially the collaborator interaction. So I found on a client system that if I just defined the DTD, that it would actually resolve the name. And then here, and it will make the HTTP request as well. So here's my server listening for, on a specific port, getting that call back. So that was cool. This is basically an SSRF. So neat. Another use of it I thought was kind of cool is if I give it an internal IP address and port, and it's valid, it'll come back in less than a second. If it's not valid, the watch means it took some time, took about a second. Then I know that that's a bad port. So I can use this to port scan inside their environment. That's kind of cool too. I was a little disappointed when I went to report it to them, because it took a while to kind of like communicate well, so that everybody understood what I was talking about. And then once they got fully what I was explaining, they said, "Oh, we're already working on that." Which, sure, okay. So to answer your first question, what about the new Struts, right? The one that just came out this summer, 11776. That one we actually got I say we as though James Kettle and I hang out. But we got a request from Decidedly Gray asking for that, and I looked into it, and it wasn't much different from the other vulnerabilities. The only catch with this one is it's specifically for malformed redirects. So if you are, when you're actively scanning your target, if you're not actively scanning the 302s, the redirects, you're going to miss this specific Struts vulnerability because it's in badly handled redirects. So so be aware of that. But that is now in as well. And that took just a couple of weeks from the release of the vuln. So that was fun. I speak quickly, so there's time for questions, I believe. What questions do people have about coding, giving things away, and Struts? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so it worked. The question was, what was the thing that he wanted me to change in it, and it was actually in kind of how I used the API, because some things are really easy and automatic in Burp in the way it handles the different methods and objects. Some things aren't. I didn't realize that there was an easy way to have my test insertion happen with every insertion point. So I was having it happen with each request. So it would actually go to, and this was the 2017 Holiday Hack edition of Struts vulnerability. I was having it like cycle through the headers manually to inject the payload into the different headers when there's actually already a different function to do that automatically. So it was just a matter of simplifying that. By the way, if you look at the code, there's no easy way when you're coding an extension to switch a GET request to a POST. So if you're scanning a GET request and you want to maybe switch it to a POST, so you can post an XXE trial into the web application, there's no function to just swap it over. So in the code, you'll actually see me looking for a capital G, like for a GET, and then deleting 3 characters, and then inserting POST. And then Burp thankfully takes care of like content length. But yeah, so it was just really that made it a lot slicker. Mr. Thayer. You know, the one I was working with was Python 2.7. I don't know. Does anybody know if there's a Python 3 Jython? Great question. Thanks, Jeff. Yeah. I'm sorry, can you say that one more time? Yeah, what resources are useful for building a plugin for Burp? So I wish I'd noticed actually the DerbyCon talk from last year. That would have been helpful to look at. But there's a decent amount of documentation up from Portswigger about all the different methods and objects. So that was helpful. And also just looking at other people's code, looking at the existing ActiveScan++ and some of the just weirdo things it looks for me was really helpful. So if you're looking to code your own, someone may have already done it, or what you're trying to do, but I would almost guarantee someone has done something similar. So just look around and see what you can steal. Other questions? Yeah. Does it run passively as well as actively? It does not. No, these checks are specifically active checks. Yeah, looking for remote code execution. Thank you. Anybody else? Well, thanks so much for coming. I appreciate you coming out. Thanks.